So to me, a secular state is a means to the end of being religious. As a Muslim, I need the state to be secular, and for that reason, I support a secular state.
Hello, my name is Jacques Berlinerblau of Georgetown University, and you've just clicked into Faith Complex, a dialogue about the entanglement between religion and politics. Joining us today is Professor Abdullahi an-Naim, a professor of law at Emory University and a visiting professor and senior fellow at Georgetown University's Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Professor an-Naim is also the author of Islam and the Secular State, a book which I feel is one of the most important books to be written in this field. In fact, if I am wrong, I will give up my status as a tenured professor. That's how certain I am that this book is going to set the agenda in Islamic studies and political theory for decades to come. Professor Naim, welcome to Faith Complex.
Thank you very much.
Professor Naim, you were born in the northern part of Sudan, and then your family came to the United States. Why did you leave Sudan?
I was born and raised and educated in Sudan. I was teaching in Sudan. I was part of an Islamic reform movement that was suppressed in the mid-1980s. So I had to leave Sudan by the mid-80s, and for several years I was hoping to go back.
When you say you had to leave, did you leave at the point of a gun?
I was in prison before I had to leave. I had no choice. I have been in the United States since 1993.
The Sudan you grew up in is now officially, anyhow, living under Sharia law. Could you explain to our viewers precisely what Sharia law is?
Sharia law is the totality of the religious obligation of a Muslim. So to me, I think I would emphasize religious. So it is not a state law.
One popular reading of Sharia law is that it is the actual word of God, but in your work you have strenuously argued against that proposition. Is Sharia law the actual word of God?
It cannot be, because the word of God has to be understood by human beings. So how can the divine remain divine when it enters human consciousness? So as human beings, we have to understand what God intended, and we will disagree on what God meant.
So the revelation that the Prophet Muhammad received is final, but the interpretation of that revelation is never ending, correct?
For me, that is the case. I believe it to be final as revelation. I believe human agency in interpreting and applying it to be permanent and necessary.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you are a practicing Muslim?
Yes, I am.
And you're a practicing Muslim that has thought long and hard comparatively about Sharia law and the types of law that we have in Western secular societies, societies that are beholden to constitutionalism, human rights, and civic discourse. Which do you prefer?
I prefer a secular state for the possibility of a religious society. As a Muslim, I need the state to be secular, and for that reason, I support a secular state, but not secularism of society.
Now, you undoubtedly have many critics, am I not correct? Let's go through some of the charges that your critics might level at you. All right, charge number one, separating the state from Sharia is categorically un-Islamic.
Actually, it is the opposite, that the state cannot be part of enforcing Sharia. My claim is that the state has always been separated as a political institution from Sharia as a body of religious law.
So the separation of Sharia from the state has actually been the norm in the history of Islamic civilizations.
That's precisely my position, that what we tend to assume of as a unity, it is between Islam and politics, not Islam and the state.
Accusation number two, separating the state from Sharia law would lead to the complete moral decay of Islamic society.
If there is moral decay, the state can do nothing about it, because who is the state after all? So to have people or institutions of the state trying to enforce morality is a corruption of morality.
Claim number three made against Professor an-Naim, any attempt to wed secularism to Islam is something of an artificial imposition of a Western construct on a society that is simply not Western in that sense.
No, it is the opposite again, that the Islamic State has always been a political institution. It has never been a religious institution. So secularism in the sense of separation of religion and the state is not new to Muslim societies. It has always been the history.
But I think there's a misunderstanding of your work. You are not trying to privatize Islam. You are not trying to tell Islamic actors to completely remove themselves from the political sphere. What are you telling them?
My point is that I need the state to be secular so that I can be the Muslim I choose to be by choice and conviction. that will entail my engaging public issues from my perspective as a Muslim.
Has anyone ever told you that your thought bears uncanny resemblances to the thought of Martin Luther?
Yeah, some people have said that, but I would rather think as something that is more broadly human than Martin Luther, because that is a very European specific experience, which frankly is not helpful for my case among Muslims. I would rather be identified with trends of ways of thinking among Muslim scholars as well as human scholars at large.
So you think being billed as the Sudanese Martin Luther is not going to gain you constituencies in the Islamic world?
No, that's not helpful at all.
True, but like Martin Luther, you have a deep suspicion of the state and what the state does to religion.
I agree with that. I think that both, that the state corrupts religion and religion corrupts the state.
And also, like Martin Luther, you tend to see the state as a sort of necessary evil, right? The state is absolutely necessary to taxes, trains, keeping social order, warfare occasionally, so you don't detest the concept of the state.
To the extent that we as humans control the state and make it our means, yes, it is necessary, but it doesn't have to be evil.
One of the most interesting arguments you make in this book is where you defend heresy. You argue that heresy is something that accrues to the greater good of Islamic civilization. Should we refer to you as Professor An-Naim, the impresario of heretics?
Yes, I hope I never lose the gift of being a heretic. Because I think being a heretic is being willing to stand up and speak against the grain of what is dominant in discourse. And we need that voice. And I hope that I have the courage to do so. And I have the freedom to do so. Because it's okay for me to be called a heretic, so long as nobody acts on it by killing me for being a heretic. So, and I celebrate heresy as a creative force.
Now, are folks in Sudan taking your advice?
I think they have. In fact, not mine only, but their own experience with the so-called Islamic government of Sudan have shown the total corruption and bankruptcy of this doctrine. So now when I go to Sudan, I was there in December, I see people fully realizing that this so-called Sharia state has failed in every way. It's just that people are not clear. What I'm trying to do is to articulate in Islamic terms what people already have experienced in their own lives.
Now, if I understand correctly, you travel extensively in the Islamic world. Can you name some Islamic societies where you breathe freely, where you see the real possibilities of the type of state that you envision?
Actually, most of them except the Middle East. West Africa, Senegal, Mali, Gambia. If you think of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Central Asia. The Middle East is not typical. In fact, the vast majority of Muslims live outside the Middle East. The Middle East is only 10% of the total Muslim population.
If you could enjoy a good Washington brunch with Mr. Ahmadinejad of Iran, what advice would you give him?
I wouldn't have lunch with him, with all due respect.
You wouldn't have brunch?
No, I
nothing.
wouldn't. Because I think the point to me is too confrontational, too politicizing of very serious issues. And I think we need more serious leadership than this. It will not be productive. I would rather have a lunch with Iranian intellectuals, with Iranian human rights activists.
Of which there is a glorious class of
Absolutely, and I'm sure there will be more productive a conversation than with Ahmadinejad.
What Muslim leaders would you like to speak to for brunch in Washington?
For me, it has to be in civil society, not in the state institutions. Whether it is human rights activism or Islamic reform, it is more human, it's more society-based. That's where the real thing is happening.
And as you think about the coming future of Islam, are you an optimist or a pessimist?
An optimist. I call myself a pragmatic optimist.
What is the single greatest sign of optimism right now in the Islamic world?
I think the Indonesian elections of 2 days ago prove how tiny so-called support for an Islamic political party is in Indonesia, which is the largest majority Muslim country in the world. So I think recent current events, even in places like Sudan, show the bankruptcy of the idea of an Islamic state.
Professor An-Naim, I want to thank you so much for coming. And I want to reiterate that I really feel this book is a big book in scholarly terms, which people will be discussing for decades to come. In fact, I like it so much. Could I please ask you to read one of my favorite passages from this book?
Okay, I will be delighted to.
Thank you so much.
As a Muslim, I need a secular state in order to live in accordance with Sharia, out of my own genuine conviction and free choice, personally and in community with other Muslims. which is the only valid way of legitimately being a Muslim. Belief in Islam or any religion logically requires the possibility of disbelief, because belief has no value if it's coerced. If I am unable to disbelieve, I will not be able to believe.